The lecture hall at the Galactic Military Academy fell silent as Admiral Kethvar, a towering Vorthak with steel-gray scales, posed the question that would change everything. His serpentine eyes swept across the assembled cadets from dozens of species, each representing the finest military minds their worlds could offer. "What is the kill ratio of a single Terran Marine?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of genuine curiosity, mixed with barely concealed skepticism. The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Cadet Zephys, a proud Altarian with crystalline features that reflected the Academy's harsh lighting, was the first to break the silence. His species had dominated space warfare for 3 centuries before humans arrived on the galactic stage. "Respectfully, Admiral, that question seems irrelevant," Zephys said, his voice carrying the musical tones typical of his people. "Terrans have been part of the Galactic Defense Force for only 47 standard years. Their technology is primitive compared to established species. A single Altarian pilot commands a fleet of autonomous drones. A Catherian warrior can manipulate gravity itself. What could one human soldier possibly accomplish?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Cadet Morthek, a massive Gorlian whose rocky hide could deflect plasma bolts, nodded approvingly. "The Terrans fight with chemical projectiles and primitive explosives. Their reflexes are slow, their strength is minimal. Even their lifespans are laughably short." Admiral Kethvar remained motionless, but those who knew him well could detect the slight curl of his lip that indicated amusement. He had served alongside humans for 2 decades, long enough to understand what most of the galaxy had yet to learn. "Cadet Yilara," he called to a young Nexarian female whose forearms were folded in contemplation. "Your thoughts?" Cadet Yilara, the Nexarian's large eyes flickered with intelligence. Her species was known for tactical brilliance, having never lost a war in their recorded history. "I have studied the Terran military structure, Admiral. They rely heavily on unit cohesion and combined arms tactics. Individual kill ratios seem less relevant to their doctrine than collective effectiveness." "An astute observation," the Admiral acknowledged. "But you have not answered my question." The hall erupted in whispered discussions. Statistical data was shared between cadets through neural links and quantum communicators. The Vrex contingent, known for their computational abilities, had already processed every available human military engagement. Cadet Thixara, a insectoid Vrex with compound eyes that processed information at superhuman speeds, stood up. "Admiral, based on available data from the Terran integration wars and subsequent conflicts, the average kill ratio for human Marines ranges from 3.2 to 4.7 enemy combatants per casualty, depending on terrain and technological disparity. This is adequate, but hardly exceptional compared to elite forces from other species." The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but something in his posture suggested the cadets were missing something crucial. He walked to the massive holographic display dominating the center of the lecture hall and activated it with a gesture. "Let me tell you about Sergeant Marcus Chen," he began, and the display showed the image of an unremarkable human male in standard military fatigues. Age 28, born on the frontier world of New Harrisburg, no genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements, no psychic abilities. By your metrics, he should be utterly insignificant. Quote, the image shifted to show a barren world covered in crystalline formations that stretched toward a purple sky. This is Keth Prime, the Vrex homeworld's primary defensive installation. 3 years ago, a Devourer scout fleet discovered its location. The mention of the Devourers sent a chill through the hall. Even speaking their name was considered dangerous by some species. They were the galaxy's nightmare, a hive-minded species that consumed entire worlds, converting all biological matter into more of themselves. The installation housed 12 million Vrex civilians and military personnel, the Admiral continued. It was protected by orbital defense platforms, automated weapon systems, and a garrison of 50,000 of the galaxy's finest soldiers. When the Devourers arrived, they brought 600,000 warriors. The display showed the initial assault. Massive bioships disgorged waves of chittering, 6-limbed monsters that moved with terrifying coordination. The Vrex defenders fought with characteristic precision, their quantum weapons tearing through Devourer ranks with mathematical efficiency. The battle lasted 18 hours, Admiral Kethvar said quietly. The Vrex defense was textbook perfect. Every shot calculated, every movement precise. They inflicted massive casualties on the Devourer force. Cadet Thixara's antennae twitched with pride. The Vrex had always been the galaxy's premier defensive specialists. But textbook tactics assume your enemy follows logical patterns, the Admiral continued. Devourers don't retreat when faced with overwhelming losses. They don't break formation when their commanders fall. They simply keep coming, adapting with each wave, learning from every death. The holographic display showed the gradual deterioration of the Vrex defense. Ammunition ran low. Weapons overheated. The mathematically perfect formations began to crack under the relentless pressure of an enemy that treated each casualty as a learning experience rather than a loss. By hour 16, the outer perimeter had fallen. By hour 17, Devourer bioforms had breached the main facility. The Vrex were down to their last defensive line. The civilian evacuation center where 12 million non-combatants waited for rescue ships that would never arrive. The cadets watched in horrified silence as the display showed Devourer warriors pouring through corridors, their adaptive biology already showing resistance to Vrex weapons. What had started as a military engagement was becoming a massacre. The garrison commander, General Vex Thera, sent a final transmission requesting immediate evacuation for survivors. There were no ships available, no reinforcements, no hope. Admiral Kethvar paused, letting the weight of the situation sink in. That was when Sergeant Chen responded. Responded how? Cadet Zephys asked, his crystalline features showing genuine confusion. One human soldier could not possibly affect the outcome of such a battle. The Admiral smiled, and for the first time since beginning his lecture, his expression showed something other than neutral professionalism. It was the look of someone about to reveal a truth that would fundamentally change how his audience understood reality. Sergeant Chen was aboard a supply transport 17 light minutes away when he intercepted the distress call. His ship was carrying medical supplies to a research station. No weapons, no military escort, no combat capability whatsoever. The crew wanted to jump to safety. Protocol demanded they report the situation and await orders. The display shifted to show a small, ungainly vessel barely larger than a system shuttle. It looked utterly insignificant against the backdrop of the massive Devourer fleet. Instead, Sergeant Chen asked the captain to drop him on the planet's surface. Admiral Kethvar continued. Alone. The lecture hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Even species known for their warrior cultures found the idea of a single soldier attempting to influence such a battle to be beyond reckless. The captain refused. Of course, it would be suicide, pointless, a waste of life with no possible benefit. The Admiral's voice carried a note of grim appreciation. But he had never served with humans before. He did not understand that sometimes, when faced with impossible odds, humans do not calculate probability of success. They simply act. The display now showed the transport ship changing course, heading directly toward the planet's surface, while Devourer bioships swarmed overhead like feeding predators. Sergeant Chen convinced the crew to perform a single supply drop. Not for him, for the Vrex defenders. He had noticed something in the facility's schematic that others had missed. Cadet Yilara leaned forward, her forearms gripping the edge of her seat. What could he have possibly seen that Vrex tactical analysts had not? That the facility was built on a crystalline substrate, Admiral Kethvar replied. Natural formations that the Vrex used for their quantum computing arrays. Sergeant Chen had grown up on a mining world. He knew explosives. He understood geology. Most importantly, he recognized an opportunity that required someone willing to sacrifice everything for a chance. Not a guarantee, but merely a chance, to save 12 million lives. The display showed the transport ship's cargo bay opening as it skimmed the planet's surface at dangerous speed. A single figure dropped out, landing in rough terrain several kilometers from the facility's outer perimeter. The supply drop consisted of everything the transport was carrying that could be used as an explosive. Medical oxygen tanks, fuel cells, mining charges left over from the ship's previous run. Sergeant Chen had 3 hours to somehow reach the facility, penetrate Devourer-controlled territory, and find a way to destabilize the substrate beneath the primary nest they were establishing in the civilian center. Impossible, Cadet Morthek rumbled. No single warrior could fight through hundreds of Devourers. You are absolutely correct, Admiral Kethvar agreed. Which is why Sergeant Chen did not try to fight them. The cadets exchanged puzzled glances. The Admiral's statement seemed contradictory to everything they had been told about human military doctrine. Instead, he did something that no other species in the galaxy would have considered logical, practical, or even sane. The Admiral's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But in the silent hall, every word carried clearly. He walked up to the facility's main entrance and surrendered. The silence in the lecture hall was absolute. Even the ambient hum of the Academy's atmospheric systems seemed to have stopped as every cadet struggled to process what Admiral Kethvar had just revealed. Surrendered? Cadet Zephys finally managed to say, his crystalline features reflecting his confusion. That makes no tactical sense whatsoever. Admiral Kethvar nodded slowly. By conventional military logic, you are entirely correct. Surrender typically means capture, interrogation, and death. When dealing with Devourers, they do not take prisoners for exchange. They do not honor agreements. They consume. The holographic display shifted to show footage from Devourer encounters across the galaxy. The images were disturbing. Worlds stripped of all biological matter, leaving behind only barren rock and metal. The Devourers were not conquerors in any traditional sense. They were a force of nature, as unstoppable and destructive as entropy itself. But Sergeant Chen had studied every available report on Devourer behavior, the Admiral continued. He knew something that most military analysts either missed or dismissed as irrelevant. When Devourers capture live specimens, they do not kill immediately. They study them first. Cadet Yil-Ara's forearms gestured in a complex pattern that indicated deep thought among her species. The consumption process requires biological analysis to maximize efficiency. But that analysis takes time. Precisely. 47 minutes on average, according to Vrek's intelligence estimates. The Admiral's expression grew grim. 2. Sergeant Chen was betting his life that he could accomplish his mission in less than 47 minutes while being examined by creatures designed to strip every secret from his biology. The display now showed the moment of surrender in grainy detail, captured by facility security systems. A lone human figure walking calmly toward a mass of chittering Devourer warriors, his hands raised in the universal gesture of surrender. The creatures immediately swarmed him, their movements showing the characteristic curiosity they displayed when encountering new biological specimens. The Devourers dragged him into the facility's central laboratory, Admiral Kethvar explained, the same laboratory that sat directly above the largest concentration of crystalline substrate formations. As they began their analysis, Sergeant Chen did something that changed the course of the entire battle. What could he possibly do while being dissected alive? Cadet Morthek asked, his rocky features showing disturbed fascination. He talked to them. The statement was so unexpected that several cadets actually laughed. The idea of conversation with Devourers was absurd. They were hive-minded entities that communicated through biochemical signals. They had no language in any recognizable sense. I know how that sounds, Admiral Kethvar acknowledged. But Sergeant Chen was not attempting verbal communication. He was utilizing the one form of language that Devourers do understand: biological response patterns. The display showed medical readouts from the facility's sensors, tracking life signs in the central laboratory. Human vital signs appeared on the screen, showing patterns that seemed almost impossibly controlled for someone undergoing Devourer examination procedures. Every species reacts to pain, fear, and stress in predictable ways, the Admiral explained. Heart rate increases, stress hormones flood the system, brain activity becomes chaotic. Devourers read these patterns to understand their prey. But humans have a unique ability among galactic species. They can consciously control their autonomic responses through mental discipline. Cadet Thixara's compound eyes processed the data streaming across the display. The heart rate is remaining steady. Stress hormone levels are fluctuating in a rhythmic pattern. This is impossible during active devourer examination. Not impossible. Deliberate. Admiral Kethvar highlighted specific sections of the medical readout. Sergeant Chen was using his own biological responses as a communication method. He was telling the devourers exactly what they wanted to know about human physiology, but in a carefully structured sequence. The implications began to dawn on the assembled cadets. Cadet Yul'ara was the first to vocalize what others were thinking. He was directing their examination, making them focus on specific areas while ignoring others, while simultaneously mapping the facility's internal structure through echolocation. The Admiral's voice carried a note of admiration that he rarely showed. Human hearing is not as acute as some species, but it is remarkably adaptable. Sergeant Chen was using the sounds of devourer movement, facility ventilation, and structural resonance to build a three-dimensional map of everything around him. The display now showed a wireframe reconstruction of the facility's interior, built from audio analysis alone. The detail was astonishing. Every corridor, every room, every structural support beam rendered with architectural precision. After 32 minutes of examination, the devourers had learned everything they believed they needed to know about human biology. They prepared for the final consumption phase. Admiral Kethvar paused, and his next words carried the weight of absolute certainty. That was when Sergeant Chen activated the charges. The cadets leaned forward as one. The display showed the facility from the outside, its crystalline base sparkling in the purple light of the local star. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the entire structure began to sing. The explosion was unlike anything in conventional warfare. Instead of a single devastating blast, the carefully placed charges had created a cascade resonance effect in the crystalline substrate. Every formation in the facility began vibrating at exactly the right frequency to amplify the effect exponentially. The Vreks had built their facility to utilize natural crystalline resonance for their computing systems, Admiral Kethvar explained, as the display showed the building beginning to collapse in perfect mathematical precision. Sergeant Chen had turned that same system into the galaxy's most sophisticated demolition device. The effect was beautiful and terrible. The facility did not simply fall. It sang itself apart. Each crystal formation transferring energy to the next, in a wave of controlled destruction that radiated outward from the central laboratory. Every devourer in the main facility was crushed instantly, the Admiral continued. The resonance effect disrupted their bioship's navigation systems. The collapse created a debris field that made landing impossible for reinforcements, but the display was not finished. As the facility continued its musical destruction, something else became visible in the wreckage. Movement. Life signs. The civilian evacuation center was built with quantum-reinforced barriers designed to withstand stellar radiation, Admiral Kethvar said quietly. Those barriers held. All 12 million Vreks survived. The lecture hall was completely silent now. Every cadet was processing the implications of what they had witnessed. A single human soldier had not only infiltrated an impregnable devourer position, but had turned the enemy's own examination procedures against them, mapped an entire facility through passive listening, and triggered a demolition sequence that saved 12 million lives while eliminating hundreds of thousands of devourers. The kill ratio, Cadet Zephys said slowly, was not 3.2 to 4.7. No, Admiral Kethvar confirmed. For Sergeant Marcus Chen, on that day, in those specific circumstances, the kill ratio was approximately 400,000 to 1. The number hung in the air like a challenge to everything the cadets thought they understood about warfare, mathematics, and physical possibility. But that is not the end of the story, the Admiral continued, and the display shifted to show rescue ships arriving at the shattered facility. Because Sergeant Chen survived, gasps echoed through the hall. Surviving devourer examination was considered impossible. Surviving at the epicenter of a cascade resonance explosion was beyond impossible. The devourers had been examining him in the facility's central laboratory, which was surrounded by the most sophisticated emergency containment systems in Vreks engineering. When the resonance began, those systems activated automatically, protecting the laboratory's contents from the destruction they had helped to cause. The display showed rescue teams extracting a human figure from the rubble. Sergeant Chen was unconscious, critically injured, but alive. More importantly, he was still human. The Devourers had not had time to begin the consumption process. He spent 3 months in a Vrex medical facility recovering from his injuries, Admiral Kethvar said. During that time, he became something of a celebrity among the scientific community. They wanted to understand how a primitive human had accomplished something that their most advanced tactical computers had deemed impossible. Cadet Thixera's antennae twitched with curiosity. What did their analysis reveal? That they had been asking the wrong questions. The Admiral's expression grew thoughtful. The Vrex had approached the problem with perfect logic, calculating optimal firing solutions, ammunition expenditure rates, and casualty projections. They had computed every variable except the most important one. Which was, Cadet Yalara asked, the willingness of a single individual to sacrifice everything for people he had never met, would never meet, and who had no obligation to remember his name. Admiral Kethvar's voice carried a note of something approaching reverence. The Vrex could calculate the physics of explosive resonance, but they could not quantify the mathematics of heroism. The display now showed Sergeant Chen after his recovery, standing in a simple military dress uniform as he received the highest honors that both the Vrex Collective and the Galactic Defense Force could bestow. But what struck the cadets was not the ceremony or the medals. It was the expression on his face. Completely ordinary. Slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Utterly human. Sergeant Chen returned to active duty after his recovery. Admiral Kethvar continued. He requested assignment to a supply transport. Same job, same rank, same willingness to walk into impossible situations when civilian lives were at stake. The implications of this statement were staggering. Here was a soldier who had achieved the impossible, who had been offered promotion to the highest levels of military command, who could have written his own ticket to any position in the galaxy. Instead, he chose to return to the unglamorous work of delivering medical supplies and equipment to frontier worlds. This brings us back to my original question, the Admiral said, and the display returned to the simple image of Sergeant Chen in standard military fatigues. What is the kill ratio of a single Terran Marine? The cadets looked at each other uncertainly. The mathematical answer was clear. The events at Keth Prime provided an indisputable data point. But something in the Admiral's tone suggested that the numerical answer was missing something crucial. The answer, Admiral Kethvar said slowly, depends entirely on what you are measuring. Admiral Kethvar allowed his words to settle over the lecture hall, like dust, after an explosion. The assembled cadets sat in stunned silence, each trying to reconcile the mathematical impossibility they had just witnessed with everything they thought they knew about warfare and military strategy. I can see the confusion in your expressions, the Admiral continued, his serpentine features showing something that might have been amusement. You are trying to understand how one soldier could achieve such results. You are searching for some technological advantage, some genetic modification, some tactical innovation that could explain the impossible. Cadet Zephys raised one crystalline hand hesitantly. Admiral, with respect, the mathematics do not support sustainable results of this magnitude. Sergeant Chen's success must have been an anomaly, a perfect combination of circumstances that could not be replicated. An interesting hypothesis, Admiral Kethvar acknowledged. The Galactic Defense Force Command shared your skepticism. They commissioned a comprehensive study of human military effectiveness, analyzing every engagement involving Terran forces over the past 4 decades. The holographic display activated again, showing a complex array of statistical data, battle reports, and tactical analyses from hundreds of conflicts across the galaxy. The information was overwhelming. Pages of reports, casualty figures, and outcome assessments stretching back to humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. The study took 3 years to complete, the Admiral said. It involved cooperation from 17 different species, analysis of over 10,000 separate military actions, and evaluation by the finest strategic minds in the galaxy. The results were unexpected. Data began flowing across the display in organized streams. Battle outcomes, casualty ratios, mission success rates, and tactical innovations were sorted by species, engagement type, and environmental factors. The patterns that emerged were unlike anything the cadets had seen before. Every other species showed predictable performance curves, Admiral Kethvar explained. The Altarians excel in space combat due to their advanced technology and precision piloting. The Gorlians dominate ground assault through superior physical strength and resilience. The Vreks achieve tactical excellence through computational analysis and coordinated strategy. The display highlighted these patterns clearly. Each species had distinct strengths that translated into consistent advantages in specific combat scenarios. Their performance could be modeled, predicted, and optimized according to well-understood principles. But humans? The Admiral paused, and the display shifted to show Terran military statistics. Humans defied every analytical model. The data was chaotic. Human performance metrics showed wild variations that seemed to follow no logical pattern. In some engagements, Terran forces performed at average levels. In others, they achieved results that bordered on miraculous. There was no consistent technological advantage, no predictable environmental factor, no standardized tactical approach that could explain the variations. Cadet Morthik studied the display with growing confusion. Their performance appears random. How can this be considered effective military doctrine? Because you are measuring the wrong variables, Admiral Kethvar replied. Watch what happens when we correlate human performance with a different set of factors. The display reorganized itself, and suddenly patterns began to emerge from the chaos. Human military effectiveness showed dramatic spikes in correlation with specific circumstances: civilian populations at risk, outnumbered friendly forces, impossible odds, and situations where retreat was not an option. The study revealed that human military performance follows an inverse relationship with probability of success, the Admiral explained. The more hopeless the situation, the more effective human forces become. Cadet Yil-Ara's forearms gestured in disbelief. That contradicts every principle of military psychology. Morale should decrease as chances of survival diminish. For every other species? Yes, Admiral Kethvar agreed. But humans appear to operate on entirely different psychological principles. They do not fight harder because they expect to win. They fight harder because someone needs to. The display now showed specific examples of this phenomenon. Human forces holding impossible positions until reinforcements could arrive. Single squads taking on entire enemy battalions to buy time for civilian evacuations. Individual soldiers walking into certain death to prevent larger catastrophes. The study identified what researchers called the Chen phenomenon, the Admiral continued. Named after Sergeant Chen's actions at Keth Prime, it describes the tendency of human forces to achieve exponentially better results when facing impossible odds in service of others. The mathematical models on the display were staggering. Human kill ratios showed a direct correlation with the hopelessness of their tactical situation. The more desperate the circumstances, the more creative, determined, and effective they became. But surely this cannot be sustainable, Cadet Thixara protested. Such tactics would result in massive casualties among human forces. Another interesting assumption, Admiral Kethvar said. Show me the casualty analysis. The display shifted to show comparative casualty rates across different species during similar engagements. The results were counterintuitive. Despite consistently accepting missions that other species would consider suicide, human casualty rates were actually lower than average. How is this possible? Cadet Zephys demanded. Because humans do not simply charge into hopeless situations, the Admiral explained. They find ways to make the impossible possible. Sergeant Chen did not survive Keth Prime through luck. He survived because he planned to survive. Every human soldier who walks into an impossible situation believes they will find a way to walk out. The display showed tactical innovations that human forces had developed across the galaxy. Improvised weapons, created from civilian technology, psychological warfare techniques that exploited enemy weaknesses no one had previously identified, strategic use of terrain and timing that turned disasters into victories. The study concluded that asking for the kill ratio of a single Terran Marine is like asking for the combat effectiveness of hope, Admiral Kethvar said quietly. It cannot be quantified, because it depends entirely on variables that exist outside conventional military analysis. A new voice spoke from the back of the lecture hall. But Admiral, if human effectiveness is so dependent on desperate circumstances, how do they perform in routine operations? Admiral Kethvar turned to see a young Nexarian cadet who had been silent throughout the presentation. An excellent question, Cadet Veltara. The answer is that there are no routine operations when humans are involved. The statement drew confused murmurs from the assembled students. The Admiral gestured for silence and continued. 3 months ago, I received a report from the freight station at Cordalis VII. It was labeled as a routine supply delivery, the kind of mission that usually generates no paperwork beyond inventory confirmation. He paused, and something like anticipation crossed his features. The supply run was conducted by Sergeant Chen. The display showed a peaceful trading station orbiting a gas giant. The installation was unremarkable. A collection of docking bays and storage facilities that served as a distribution point for the outer systems. Nothing about it suggested military significance. The delivery was medical supplies for the station's civilian hospital. Admiral Kethvar continued. Standard pharmaceuticals, diagnostic equipment, basic surgical tools. Sergeant Chen arrived on schedule, completed the delivery without incident, and departed for his next destination. The cadets waited for more information, but the Admiral seemed to have finished his account. That's it? Cadet Morthek rumbled. A routine supply delivery? On the surface, yes, Admiral Kethvar agreed. But the station commander filed a follow-up report 3 days later. During the unloading process, Sergeant Chen had noticed that one of the station's atmospheric recyclers was producing irregular harmonic vibrations. The display showed technical specifications for the recycling system. To most observers, it would have appeared completely normal. Sergeant Chen mentioned to the dock supervisor that the vibration pattern matched what he had heard on mining worlds when tunnel supports were beginning to fail. The Admiral continued. He suggested they might want to have it checked. Routine maintenance recommendation, Cadet Yalara observed. Hardly unusual. The inspection revealed microfractures in the primary support structure that would have caused catastrophic failure within 2 weeks, Admiral Kethvar said quietly. The station housed 40,000 civilians. Total evacuation would have been impossible in the time available. The implications sank in slowly. What had appeared to be a routine supply delivery had actually been another impossible situation. Except this time, the disaster had been prevented before it could occur. How could he have known? Cadet Thixara asked. Human senses are not capable of detecting structural microfractures through atmospheric vibration analysis. He could not have known, the Admiral replied. But he paid attention anyway. Sergeant Chen has no training in structural engineering, no advanced sensory capabilities, no specialized equipment. He simply listened to an unfamiliar sound and thought it might be important enough to mention. The display now showed the maintenance report. The fractures had been caused by an unusual resonance effect from the station's proximity to the gas giant's magnetic field. No existing safety protocol had anticipated the problem. Computer diagnostics had detected no anomalies. Only human intuition had recognized the danger. The station commander requested a commendation for Sergeant Chen. Admiral Kethvar continued. The paperwork was denied because preventing a disaster that had not yet occurred does not qualify for recognition under military regulations. But Sergeant Chen saved 40,000 lives, Cadet Zephys protested. Yes, and he will never receive official credit for doing so. The Admiral's voice carried a note of frustration with bureaucratic limitations. This brings us to the final point of today's lecture. The display returned to its original question. What is the kill ratio of a single Terran Marine? The question assumes that military effectiveness can be measured by destruction, Admiral Kethvar said. Enemy forces eliminated, objectives destroyed, territory conquered. These are metrics that apply to every other species in the galaxy. The cadets watched as the display began showing a different kind of data. Civilian populations evacuated from war zones. Infrastructure preserved during conflicts. Enemy forces that had surrendered rather than face human tactics. Colonies that had been saved from natural disasters by human intervention. But humans fight for different reasons. The Admiral continued. They do not seek glory or conquest, or even survival. They fight because someone needs them to. They win because losing is unacceptable when others depend on them. The mathematical impossibility of human military effectiveness finally made sense. They were not optimizing for traditional victory conditions. They were optimizing for the preservation and protection of life, any life, even enemy life when possible. So I ask you again, Admiral Kethvar said. What is the kill ratio of a single Terran Marine? Those well, and one. Cadet Veltara stood slowly from her seat in the back of the hall. The question has no answer, Admiral. Because humans are not trying to maximize their kill ratio. They are trying to minimize the need for killing at all. Admiral Kethvar nodded approvingly. Precisely. When you ask what a human can accomplish in combat, you are asking the wrong question. The correct question is, what can a human accomplish when everything depends on them succeeding? The display faded to black, leaving only the quiet hum of the lecture hall's systems. The assembled cadets sat in contemplative silence, each processing the implications of what they had learned. Tomorrow we will discuss the tactical applications of this knowledge, Admiral Kethvar announced. For now, I want you to consider one final thought. Every species in this galaxy fights for something. Territory, resources, survival, honor. But only one species fights for everyone. As the cadets filed out of the lecture hall, their conversations were subdued and thoughtful. They had come expecting to learn about military statistics and combat effectiveness. Instead, they had discovered that the galaxy's most dangerous warriors were motivated not by the desire to kill, but by the refusal to let others die. The question that had started the day, the kill ratio of a single Terran Marine, would never be asked in the same way again. Because now they understood that when it came to humans, the most important number was not how many enemies they could destroy, but how many innocents they would sacrifice everything to save. And that number, as Sergeant Marcus Chen had proven at Keth Prime and countless other forgotten battlefields across the galaxy, was always the same. All of them.